In May of 2021, when Mexican news outlets showed pictures of Jose Felix and labeled him as one of the most dangerous men in Mexico, people had little to no idea who he was. Maybe that's because they knew him by another name, El Ruso. While no one had ever seen El Ruso, except for a few terribly pixelated images, they knew not to mess with him. After all, El Ruso was Ismael El Mayo Zambada's right-hand man and the leader of the Los Rusos who'd been terrorizing Baja California. This is the story of Jose Feliz, better known as El Ruso or the Russian. The Los Rusos are a part of the Zambada faction of the Sinaloa cartel. As one of the world's largest organized crime syndicates, the Sinaloa cartel has been responsible for international drug trafficking and money laundering in well over 180 countries. The name El Chapo might ring a bell. That's because Joaquin El Chapo Guzman founded what's believed to be the most dangerous cartel in the world with his right-hand man, El Mayo, in 1980. Many would believe that the Sinaloa cartel has El Mayo to thank for its notoriety because when El Chapo was in prison during the 90s, he extended control to his right-hand man. El Mayo, then a small-time trafficker, managed to gather around several disbanded cartel members together, such as members of the Juarez cartel, and create factions of the Sinaloa cartel. Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel, long believed to have been the largest and most powerful cartel in history, was actually a lot smaller than what the Sinaloa cartel was during its heyday under El Mayo. However, when El Chapo escaped from prison, his associate was sure to remind people that he was the one who was really in charge. For his dedication and loyalty, El Chapo gave him everything he could have ever wanted. All the money in the world, the fanciest cars, and the biggest houses. However, he refused to give him control over the Sinaloa cartel. In El Chapo's mind, that honor was reserved only for his sons, Los Chapitos. In 2016, the U.S. managed to arrest El Chapo for the third time and sentenced him to live the remainder of his life behind bars. This time, it truly looked like El Chapo's reign was over for good, which brought up the question, who'd lead the Sinaloa cartel in his absence? Ivan Aribaldo Guzman Salazar and Jesus Alfredo Guzman Salazar, alongside their stepbrothers Ovidio Guzman Lopez and Joaquin Guzman Lopez, are El Chapo's sons and thus members of Los Chapitos. One of them, Ovidio, was thought to be the heir to the Sinaloa cartel. Taking over a cartel, however, is not that easy. The Los Chapitos were accused of being too egoistic, and they spent most of their time getting into trouble. El Mayo, the man who'd quite literally built up the Sinaloa cartel from scratch, wasn't willing to let Ovidio drive it back to the ground. This started the biggest and bloodiest internal conflict within a cartel we've ever seen. It was between the Zambada faction and the Chapitos faction. Cue Los Rusos. The Sinaloa cartel is actually a combination of many smaller drug trafficking rings who've pledged allegiance to the overall leaders of the cartel. However, with all the infighting between the people at the very top of the chain, the smaller cartels started to pick sides. Los Ninis, a renowned ruthless syndicate mostly made up of teenagers and young adults, decided to pledge their support to Los Chapitos. Los Rusos, the criminal leaders in Baja California, on the other hand, decided to side with the Zambada faction of the Sinaloa cartel. Since both cartels operated inside of Baja California, they started targeting members of the opposite side and created an environment of ruthlessness and bloodshed. But one of the two associations clearly had the upper hand, and that upper hand was El Ruso. Not much was known about him until 2020, but El Ruso was rumored to have been one of the first people to pledge allegiance to El Mayo. He theoretically became to El Mayo what he'd been to El Chapo back in the day. Since the bloodshed had shifted into the U.S., bordering state authorities in the United States started to take a closer look at the Los Rusos. What they uncovered was that El Ruso had been operating the cartel undetected for 20 years. Initially, it was believed that the man they'd only ever managed to see in poorly shot and blurred pictures was named either Jesus Alexander Sanchez Felix or Miguel Angel García Quintero. However, when the U.S. authorities shared this information with Mexican authorities, they couldn't trace anyone with that name back to El Ruso. So, how did they find out he was actually Jose Felix? Ovidio was arrested by the authorities in 2019, and Los Ninis was tasked with creating havoc in Baja California to the point that the authorities would be forced to release them in exchange for peace. However, since Baja California was where Los Rusos operated, they couldn't accept the disturbance to their trafficking routes. Naturally, they started to fight between themselves again, and this time, the fighting escalated to the streets. Instead of releasing Ovidio, authorities decided to end the threat in the bordering state once and for all. They launched a highly organized task force that was supposed to capture the leader of the Los Ninis and El Ruso. On May 14, 2021, the Secretariat of National Defense and the State Security and Investigation Guard detained nearly a dozen people, including 2 agents from the Attorney General's office. From them, they learned that El Ruso and several other high-profile traffickers were hiding behind a restaurant named El Moreno that served as a front for trafficking. The next step was to raid El Moreno and capture El Ruso, and although authorities managed to capture some 13 of Mexico's most dangerous traffickers, El Ruso was not one of them. The silver lining of the operation was that they finally knew who El Ruso was. While the notorious criminal managed to escape police this time, he left behind a series of documentation at the location that helped authorities build up a personal profile for the criminal. They found a driver's license and several other identification cards in a car located at the scene and managed to piece together that El Ruso was actually Jose Felix. That's not all. They figured out that El Ruso was a native of Obregón, Sonora, but was raised in the Agua Caliente syndicate of Tepuche, Sinaloa, which is 17 kilometers away from the state capital of Culiacán. 2 driving licenses were left behind. One was credited with residency of the street Jesus Leiva Torres in the suburb Lucio Blanco in Baja California, and the other is registered as a neighbor of the street Lechuza suburb Villa Sonora in Nogales. Authorities were also able to determine that he had 3 brothers and 3 sisters. 2 of his brothers had been arrested a few years prior at one of Los Rusos' exchange houses, although police didn't know they were related to the leader of the syndicate at that time. As of right now, there's no new information on where El Ruso was hiding. However, they now have a name of the face and are able to gather more information on the notorious criminal. There's still one problem though. In 2022, while authorities were trying to gather more information on El Ruso and news outlets were circulating his picture around, hoping that someone would come out with more information on the criminal, a narcocorrido, or a viral song was released by Los Juniors de Mexicali titled Los Rusos. The lyrics essentially pieced together the history and operations of the cartel. It also includes one of Los Rusos' popular sayings that they're Taliban trained for the occasion. Talibanes entrenados para la ocasión. Essentially, not many people are willing to give up information on El Ruso. Not just because of the fact that they're worried for their and their family's safety, but the fact that Los Rusos has managed to convince the people that they will never harm the innocents. Their mode of operation is just to fight against the government and authorities who are standing in the way of the young people of the cartel from getting by in tough times. The Los Rusos cartel has several people backing them up, including high-profile individuals, and it looks like it'll be a long time before investigators hunt down and capture El Ruso. And that's all for this video. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more content on notorious drug lords and cartels from around the world.